try and see if some of the other teachers want to join in on Sundays now.
Yeah. Why not?
All right, well, I guess we should get started. Good morning, everybody. The the links to the link to the handout is on the website this morning. So if you want to download it, you can. I'm again going to screen share for you. So today actually is kind of a hodgepodge day. And I wanted to have 3 class sessions that I talked about Jewish ethics because, in my opinion, that's certainly one of the most important things to know about Judaism. So on the one hand, ethics are general and not just specific to Jews. And many of the kinds of things we'll talk about today, for instance, are things that everybody would kind of readily agree are ethically and morally correct and proper behavior. But what I'll be giving you is the sort of Jewish sources that support each of these ideas. And in some cases, there may be some differences. I think one of the hodgepodge list of things we're doing today may touch on stem cell research and that issue, and that is different from certain forms of Christianity, for instance. So, so it's kind of a collection of things. I called it Honoring Parents and Aged, and then a bunch of other things. So let's take a look at what the handout says, and we'll get started here. There, right, okay. So, you know, in the Jewish tradition, again, there's no extra words in the Torah. That's been sort of a guiding principle of Jewish interpretation. For the Torah, modern Bible scholars might say, well, you know, that was literary style, or it was JEPD. It was because it's repeated because there's different source texts that make up the Torah, and they can explain it in different ways. But long before modern biblical criticism came around, Jewish tradition was to understand the Bible as being very specific in its wording, and there's no extra words. And if there's some odd scribal custom of making a letter large or letter small, or putting dots over certain words, or, you know, a choice of words that's odd, or a noun verb that doesn't connect, you know, the tense or the gender or whatever is different. All of that was grist for the mill for rabbinic interpretation. And they weren't necessarily interested, like modern people would be, in what did the original Bible author mean when he wrote this mistake, when I call it a mistake, or chose this particular word, or repeated that particular thing. They're not interested in what the original author meant. They're using this oddity, this unusual wording in the text, to teach a particular ethical or moral teaching. So it's something they already had in mind, and they're kind of hanging it, this is my opinion anyway, and they're hanging it on a textual peculiarity. That's not so different, by the way, from what priests and ministers and rabbis do today when they preach the Bible, right? We're reading the text as if it's saying something to us today. And it probably, you know, in some ways is not necessarily related to what it originally meant to the author, but we can read into that text something that is an important and meaningful statement. So how do you know if you're reading something right into the text, or if you're like going off the path and doing something your own that's not intended? And what I would say to that is, you know, that goes by the scientific process of trial and error. You know, if the way the preacher preaches or rabbi, you know, interprets the text doesn't fit with what we understand to be true, doesn't resonate with our moral sensibilities, then you can say, well, wait a minute, how do you understand that? You're really bending the text out of shape. But if it says something that we all agree on, it's like, oh yeah, and I can see how you would read it into that text, then we know it's a legitimate text. So, and of course that leaves possibility for some argument. But anyway, let's take a look at some texts. All right, so the first question was about honoring parents and the aged. And so the reason I gave this long-winded introduction is that there are actually at least 2 commandments that relate to honoring our parents. The first one, of course, is in the 10 Commandments. The way we read it, it's commandment number 5, honor your mother and your father. Actually, honor your father and your mother. Right, honor your father and your mother. But in Leviticus 19:3, It says, Ish imo va'aviv tira'u, a person, his mother and father, he will revere or awe or fear. A different verb is used here. It's not honor, it's revere or fear or be in awe of your parents. All right. And so it's a slightly different commandment, but on a related idea. So is it just saying the same thing? The rabbis say, no, obviously they're two different verbs, two different commandments, must be trying to tell us two different things. So they actually spell out in the Talmud, and here's the reference if you wanted to look it up. It's on a tractate called Kiddushin, which deals normally with betrothals, but a wide-ranging discussion that often goes off topic. And it's on page 31b. So the Talmud was written at a time when people counted pages as what they call today folios, which means a sheet in the book, the whole sheet, both sides. And so if you wanted to refer to a page in the Talmud, if you said 31, you wouldn't know which side of the sheet number 31 you're looking at. So when it says AB, then you know you're either on side A or side B, right? So that's what that means. So on folio 31, side B of the Tractate of Kiddushin, it talks about honoring and revering your parents. And there it gives us some specific commandments, specific obligations that each one of these commandments requires us to do. What does it mean to honor, or to revere or fear? By the way, yirah is the verb, which is sometimes translated as fear, and is the same verb that is used for fearing God, like a God-fearing person. I don't like the idea of fearing God, and I don't like the idea of being afraid of your parents, right? If you're afraid of your parents, there's something wrong. So I prefer revere, right? That is to be in awe of, to have some reverence for. That's what it really is trying to get across about God. We should revere God, of course, the ultimate source of everything in the universe. You should show reverence, but your parents also, because they brought you into the world. And so don't be afraid of them, but give them a certain amount of respect. So what does that mean? Well, this really is kind of customs from the old world. Maybe some of you have this still in your families. The parents, it used to be a patriarchal world. So the father, quote unquote, had his seat at the dining room table. And perhaps also the mother had her seat at the dining room table. And if that would be the case, then the children are not supposed to sit in that seat, because that would be being disrespectful to their parents. Today I think seats are more interchangeable, but in those days that was an idea. Certainly don't contradict them, certainly not in public. But what happens if and the Talmud discusses this, well, what happens if your parent is wrong, right? They're telling you, for instance, to eat pork today, or they're telling you to violate the Sabbath today, or do some other, hurt somebody when you know that's morally not right. So you're not allowed to contradict them. What do you do? And so the Talmud suggests being diplomatic and saying something to the effect of, wow, I'd really like to do that, but I think, isn't there this passage in the Torah that says we're not supposed to eat pork? I believe that's the case. So kind of try and politely point out to them where they might have made a mistake. Gee, I know you want me to cheat this person in business, but doesn't it say we're supposed to have honest weights and measures in the Bible? I think that's something we're all supposed to do here. If they persist, of course, in their errant ways after you pointed out that they're violating God's laws, you're not supposed to violate God's laws in any case. But for most part, in not contradicting them is just, this is very hard for teenagers, by the way. Teenagers are like, I think, hardwired to get into arguments with their parents. So I don't know how you advise them to try and be civil about it, and parents also. Don't side with the opponents of your parents. Again, that's the general rule. If the parents are doing something wrong, it's a different matter, but as a general rule, that's how you show respect for your parents. Those are some ideas. Honoring your parents. So what is providing honor? Well, you're supposed to provide them with food and something to drink, to clothes, and to, quote, lead them in and out, unquote. That's kind of a direct translation of the Hebrew phrase. So when I studied this text many years ago now, my teacher said this is a euphemism. The Talmud is full of euphemisms. And you have to remember that they didn't have indoor plumbing. So what this meant was you're supposed to help them to get to the outhouse and then whatever and they need to do, and then to bring them back home again. Now, these particular items here, although, if your parents asked you to get them a drink of water or prepare some dinner for them, presumably if you're still living at home because you're not an adult and on your own, you should still do that. But certainly these later things, clothing them and leading them in and out, seem to be referring to aged parents, right? And so would giving them food and drink certainly apply to aged parents. And what the rabbis seem to be saying here is, look, your parents, when you were an infant and couldn't take care of yourself, changed your diapers, gave you food to eat, gave you something to drink, gave you clothes to wear. They took care of you when you were unable to do these things for yourself. And so at the time when your parents become aged and they're not able to do these basic functions for themselves, then you are responsible for taking care of them. That led to another discussion in the Talmud. Well, what if you're busy? What if you're working and you can't do this? So then they said, well, you can hire somebody to do it for you. And then the question was, well, okay, do I need to spend my money to hire somebody to take care of them? Or can I use their money, assuming they've saved some, can I use their money first towards it? Actually, all this is discussed in the Talmud, interestingly, and it's all pretty relevant today. I unfortunately went through this with my father, who I brought here from Tucson, and we have a Jewish assisted living facility here called 7 Acres. So I was able to get him a room at 7 Acres, and we, he had some pension and whatever, and so we started by using his money to help pay for all of that. And that is what the Talmud says. Of course, you can use their funds to do that. So that's kind of the opening idea. Oh, and one other thing I want to point out. So there is in this Leviticus 19:3, if you look it up and you see an actual direct translation, it's Ish, which means man, Imo, his mother, Va'aviv, and his father, and then Tira'u, which is the verb for to fear or revere, but it's in the second person and it's plural. So in Texan, you would translate it as y'all shall fear, y'all shall revere. I'm glad I'm in Texas so I can say that. And I don't know what we say in the rest of the country where they don't have a difference between you shall revere and you shall revere. Here we know. It's one is you and the other is y'all. So y'all shall fear. That's what it says. So that is clearly some kind of textual mistake. We make those kind of mistakes when we write every time today in English. At least I certainly do. You talk about somebody, a hypothetical person doing something. So you might say, well, when you want to wash your clothes, they ought to take them out, or when they're washing the clothes, you should put in the soap first, right? Changing that so the subject and the verb don't meet. Anyway, that apparently is a biblical mistake. So what did the rabbis make of that biblical mistake? They said, since it's in plural, the beginning of the sentence was a man should revere his mother and father. But since the verb is plural, it indicates it also applies to women. Women are also obligated to revere their mother and father, right? So it's kind of a clever, close reading of the text to teach you something you probably already knew already, that it applies both to men and women. Okay, so what about non-Jewish parents? So your parents aren't Jewish, you are now Jewish, your parents aren't. Do you still have those responsibilities? And the answer is, duh. They're still your parents, right? Of course, you should treat them with respect, honor, and reverence, and hopefully they will also respect your life choices, including your religious choice, but you have a responsibility to respect them. One of the things I didn't mention here, why didn't I? Oh, parents' duties to children. Yeah, I'll get to it. Okay. So this same section in the Talmud, you'll notice it's a couple pages earlier. This is Kiddushin 29a, that was 31b. So a couple pages earlier in the Talmud, it talked about the parents' responsibilities for their children, and they list several specific things. They have responsibility to circumcise, of course, only boys. So the boys are supposed to be circumcised. That's part of the covenant of Abraham. They are to redeem the firstborn. That comes from a very ancient time when firstborn male children were dedicated for religious worship. They were supposed to be like the priests. When the tribe of Levi took over that responsibility and it became an inherited position, the Bible developed this idea, it's already in biblical times, that you had to still redeem your firstborn male son because otherwise he would have to join the Levites. So what you would do is a ceremony where you would give a number of gold coins to the Levite or the priest and say, I'm giving you these coins so that my son can continue with my family and not have to be part of your worship service group. That's called a Pidyon Haben ceremony. So it's not done as often today. I mean, it still is something that is done in many circles. It's not done as often today because it had to be the firstborn. It has to be a male. So if your firstborn is a girl, then you don't redeem her. And if the next child is a son, you don't redeem him because he's not the firstborn. Of course, this comes from when it was a patriarchal world. So that's why it was only applying to boys. And the other thing is that it has to be a natural childbirth. So if you had a C-section, then it's not counted as the firstborn. So if your firstborn male son was born through a C-section, you don't redeem him either. So first of all, it became relatively infrequently happening that you had this firstborn child son who's natural childbirth. And then I guess some people don't do it. They already have a big party for the circumcision for the boy. 30 days, it's supposed to be done 30 days after birth. So just a few weeks later, you have another party. It seems a bit much. A lot of people don't do it. But if you would like to do a ceremony like that, we do. There is a ritual. We have the coins to use. And the idea is usually the way it's done now, the community has a set of 5 coins. They had to be a certain weight of silver or gold. And they give them to you. You give them to the priest for the ceremony. And after the ceremony is over, the priest donates them back to the congregation so they can be used for the next time. The next obligation is to teach them Torah, right? Obviously, the point is you're supposed to raise your children in our faith tradition. So you have a responsibility to do that. Again, you can hire somebody to do that. So you can send them to the synagogue religious school, or you can send them to a Jewish day school. But you have a responsibility to teach them about Judaism. And even, I would say as a rabbi, even if you are sending them to school to learn, the kids learn the most from what they see their parents doing. So if you are doing Jewish things at home, you are teaching them Torah. And if you are learning, you continue to learn yourself at home, reading a Jewish book occasionally from now and then, or reading Jewish books to your children, right? You are teaching them the importance of learning Torah because you're doing it. They're watching you. So that's another obligation. In the old days, of course, matches were arranged. And so you had an obligation to find a spouse for your children. That wouldn't go over too well today. But you might say you should support them in their whatever they're working on to find a spouse so that they shouldn't be alone. And then to teach them a trade. Because, you know, if you don't teach them how to do something and be a functioning member of society, then they're going to probably turn to not so legal ways of getting money and getting by in society. So you need to teach them, or they'll be bums or, you know, whatever. So you have to try and help them to get along in society. That's a parental responsibility. And then the last thing is teaching them how to swim. So this can be understood literally, teach them how to swim because then they can't drown. But sometimes take it more figuratively, teaching them safety things like look both ways before you cross the street so you don't get run over, right? Drive carefully and safely. Teach them all kinds of safety things so that they are not going to get into accidents, or you can try and prevent them from getting into accidents. I have more about parenting in a separate session on life cycles, so we'll just leave it at that for now. But I do want to add this quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel, the rabbi I mentioned before, who marched with Martin Luther King, was very kind of mystical and poetic, sort of a teacher at the seminary. And he said that the obligation to revere your parents, or the obligation to honor your parents, is as much a commandment on the parents as it is on the children. Why? Because you have to behave in a way that would enable your children or encourage your children to honor and revere you, right? If you behave like a horrible monster, then you are violating another commandment in the Torah, which is putting a stumbling block before the blind, which we'll talk about a little later. That's a commandment that the rabbis expanded tremendously to mean don't cause anybody to trip up, even metaphorically. And if you are behaving like a monster, you're causing your children to trip and not observe their commandment to honor and revere you. You're making it very difficult for them to do that. So you're putting a stumbling block before them in their commanded obligations. And then finally, there's a commandment to respect the elderly in general, even if they're not your parents. This is so let me just point out that on the stumbling block, this is a great analysis of how that commandment was expanded. So that's why I gave it to you. And it's such an important commandment, the way it was expanded, about not tripping somebody else up. That I wanted to give you a text that sort of expands that idea. I don't know if we have time, we can come back and look at it, or if you have questions, certainly call me and we can talk about it. Let's turn this sideways. Oh, shoot. 1 second. There. Okay, so this is from a book by Joseph Telushkin, which I kind of recommend. He's the one who wrote the book Jewish Literacy, which was one of the texts for the class. He wrote another book called Jewish Wisdom, which you might be interested in. It's a book of snippets of Jewish thought from biblical times to today, but a lot of the material is from rabbinic wisdom, some modern people as well, and it's organized by topic. So a lot of ethical, moral, other kinds of subjects he covers in this book, and then he gives you quotations from Jewish sources that discuss the topic. And it's a pretty cool book for that purpose. So if you're interested in reading further, that's a good book to have. This is the section on old age from his book, Jewish Wisdom. And it comes from this commandment in Leviticus 19:32, you shall rise before the aged and show deference to the old. And then it says, you shall fear your God. So let me pause here for a moment. One of my teachers pointed out to me that every time the Bible says, or almost every time the Bible says you should fear God, or a person is a God-fearing person, it's associated with being ethical and moral. And so what does it mean to be God-fearing? It doesn't mean that you're trembling before God. It doesn't mean that you're afraid of God. It means that you recognize that you're not the center of the universe, and you have responsibilities and obligations to other people and the world, right? And therefore you do the right thing. That's what a God-fearing person does. That's what it means to be God-fearing, right? You're not a narcissistic sociopath. You care about others, and you want to bring goodness into the world. And this is just one classic example of that. This text here, right, which says you're supposed to rise before the aged and show deference to the old. Right? This is not something that a survival of the fittest, me first person would say, right? What do I care if an old person gets on the bus or the train and I'm sitting down? Let them stand. They got on the bus after me. I don't care. The answer is no. You should be God-fearing. That is, you should recognize you're not the center of the universe, and it's harder for them to stand. So you get up and give them a seat. Right. So that's what this is from Leviticus. The Babylonian Talmud here, Kedushin 33a. Notice it's pretty much the same area of the Talmud that we've seen already. We were at 31a or b before, now we're 33a. You shall rise before the aged means any aged person, not just your parents. Rabbi Yochanan used to rise in the presence of aged non-Jews, saying, how many experiences have happened to these people, right? So it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or not. Everybody should be given deference when they're older. They're entitled to some extra respect and dignity. Anyway, so you can see he has a number of things there on that. So let's go back to the top of the page. I have to rotate it back left. Okay. So that's about honor, duties to parents and children, and respect for the elderly. So we've got some information on that. Bikur Cholim. So a totally separate commandment. I told you it's a hodgepodge today. A totally separate commandment is to visit the sick. And the Talmud says that when you visit the sick, it's like you removed 1/60th of the ailment, which is a poetic way of saying something that even doctors today would say. And that is, when people visit them, it gives them more hope and inspiration and comfort. And when a patient has hope and encouragement, they're more likely to recover, and they'll recover faster. That's just been observed. If you a patient who is depressed and feels hopeless, it has the psychological effect influences the physiology of the body. So when you go to visit the sick, you are actually helping them to get better, even if you're not a doctor, just by coming to visit. Of course, there are things that people do when they visit people in the hospital that you're not supposed to do, things that are more helpful and things that are less helpful. And so I think I gave you a couple handouts about that. This Faith Heals sermon is very old. As you can see, it's like 20-something years old, I think, at this point. So I don't believe that when you pray to God, God will mechanistically heal somebody, right? We've all had the experience or know someone who's had the experience where people pray for somebody and nevertheless they get worse and perhaps even die. So it's not like your prayer will automatically make them well, but it certainly has the effect of helping their emotional well-being, because they know people are praying for them and care about them. And I am somewhat mystical myself, even though I'm a rationalist. And I do believe in divine inspiration. And so I certainly hold the possibility that your prayers can have some transitive effect on the doctors being inspired to do certain treatments that they might have otherwise not thought of, or be more diligent in providing care for a patient that needs it, because they're inspired to do so. And so when I do a prayer for the sick, which we do every week when we take the Torah out of the Ark on Saturdays, I will add in English that God will inspire the doctors with wisdom and insight to helping to heal their patients. And I have talked to doctors, and I've read cases where, a doctor would look at a patient and, they'd be going through the checklist, and then something would just come to them. It's like, oh man, wait, maybe it's this weird possible disease. Maybe I should run a test to see if that's what it is. And then they do, and they're able to cure the person. I know that crazy TV show House annoyed at least one doctor friend of mine because, it's a made-for-TV show. So there's all these unusual diseases or whatever, and they run through all the normal standard tests and treatments, and none of it's working. And then House says, "Oh, have you thought about this?" And that's what cures the person. It takes them the entire hour to figure it out. A doctor friend of mine said, any reasonable doctor would have run all those tests at the beginning and known what to do in the first 5 minutes of the show. But in any case, there is a certain amount of, I think, inspiration and intuitiveness that doctors sometimes use in practicing medicine. Hopefully there's no doctors here online that will, anybody here have any complaints about that? Any doctors? Is it okay to ask God to heal someone? Yes, definitely. It is okay. Look, first of all, I may be wrong. Maybe God does have a more direct impact on healing. However that works, and I don't know how that works, but it's certainly possible. But I do think that that there is this sort of transitive property that you are asking God to give insight to the doctors, and perhaps that works in some way. You know, we don't know how that aspect of the universe works. Yeah, not pardon haben, pidyon haben, sometimes spelled P-I-D-Y-O-N, P-I-D-Y-O-N, pidyon. Yeah, you probably can Google that and you'll get the information. Okay, let's go back to sharing the screen. Oh no, I'm sharing the screen. Okay, boom. So that's about visiting the sick. And so now, before we go on, I just want to talk about this category of commandments. So a mitzvah is a commandment. Mitzvot is the plural, commandments. And ben, the English sound ben can be the Hebrew word for son, or it can be, if it's spelled differently in Hebrew, but sounds the same in English pretty much, it can mean between, and here it means between. So a commandment between Adam, but Adam is a generic man, so here it means a person. Le chavero, le means two, chaver is his friend, is a friend, and chavero is his friend. Hopefully that you got that. So mitzvot, commandments between a person and his friend, or to his friend. Otherwise translated as what we would call ethical moral commandments, responsibilities that we have for each other, right? That's what those kind of commandments are. The other category of commandments, if we want to divide the 613 commandments into two parts, one would be moral ethical teachings, commandments and responsibilities we have to take care of each other. And then mitzvot bein adam la makom. So the same thing, mitzvot, there's commandments between a person towards, and makom means place in Hebrew, but it's also used as a name for God, meaning, you know, God is the dwelling place of the universe. So it's a kind of a euphemistic name for God. So commandments between a person and God are what we would call ritual commandments, right? Responsibilities you have to God that don't necessarily affect another person, but it's about your spiritual life, your religious life. So that's two categories of commandments that we can have. So right now we're talking about ethical moral teachings. Those are called mitzvot bein adam lechavero. So one is hospitality, right? It's a commandment really to be hospitable, to invite guests to your home. This is very often done on Shabbat evening. Friday night dinners and sometimes Saturday lunches are seen as opportunities to invite people over. I'll give you an example. Diane and I were driving across country from LA to New York. When part of my rabbinical school, I started in LA and I ended in New York. So we drove across country. We stopped in Denver. It happened to be on Friday. So we knew we were going to be stopping in Denver on Friday, and we called ahead to a synagogue and said we're going to be in town. We found, asked about a place to stay, and one of the congregants had an extra room, so we didn't even have to get a hotel, which is very nice. We stayed with them, and they had a place for us to have Friday night dinner with one of the families and a place for Saturday lunch with one of the families. That's being hospitable. That is something that a lot of Jews can do. So if you're traveling somewhere and you're Jewish and you want to, and it's going to be Shabbat and you want to go to services somewhere, you can call the synagogue and say, I'm going to be in town. What time are your services? Is there a place I can stay? What would you recommend I do about Shabbat dinners? And hopefully they will take care of you. Now, we called an Orthodox synagogue. Orthodox synagogues are much more used to doing this. Reform synagogues, not so much, and conservative synagogues slightly more than, will do it slightly more often than Reform synagogues, but it may be difficult. Every now and then I get a call, do you have a place for, somebody's going to be in town, do you have a place for them to go for Shabbat? And before COVID, we would frequently say, yeah, come over to our place for Friday night dinner. But, right now, of course, we can't do that. So that's kind of being hospitable. Where did this, and particularly on Shabbat, to have guests over as part of the experience, it makes it a more lively kind of fun thing. You have a nice meal, you share some conversation. So where did we get this idea of being hospitable? We actually got it from a midrash, a commentary on Abraham. So what's the story with Abraham? Abraham, it says in Genesis, when he was commanded to circumcise himself and his son Ishmael, he did that. And the next chapter, it says he's visited by 3 angels or 3 men. Right. And that's when they tell him that his wife, Sarah, who's now 99 years old or something, 90 something years old, is going to have a child. and they tell him about Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's 3 visitors. I'm just going to give you some midrash. So this is rabbinic interpretation on it. So the first thing the rabbis comment is, why 3? And the answer they say is that angels are like God's messengers. Angels are messengers of God. And a messenger is, or God's messengers are only given one message. Their whole function is to do one thing, and that's it. That's all they're allowed to do, just that one thing. And so God needed to send 3 messengers. The first one was to comfort Abraham and his recovery from surgery, right? The Bikur Cholim. It's God providing, visiting the sick, right? It's God visiting the sick through his angel, right? That's the first messenger. The second messenger was going to tell him that he's going to have a son. And the third messenger was to tell him that God wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So he needed 3 of them because there were 3 things that were being done at the time. But then the rabbis asked another question. It says that Abraham saw them coming from a distance. How is it possible that he saw them coming from a distance? He just happened to be sitting in the right part of his, he had to be outside of his tent, right? Or else how would he see them if he's inside his tent? And how do we know he was facing in the right direction? Just happened that he's facing the direction that they're coming from? So the answer they gave is his tent had an opening on all 4 sides. So it didn't matter where he was sitting, right? He had a view to all the directions. And why would he have a tent that was open on all sides so that he could see visitors coming from a distance? Because he wanted to show hospitality to them. He's sitting on a major crossroads, right? Israel, geographically, is along the major east-west trade route going out to Mesopotamia, to modern-day Iraq. And it's also along the eastern Mediterranean shore, a north-south trade route going from Egypt up into Syria. So it's at the crossroads of these 2 major trade routes. And since he's there, he knows that there's people traveling by all the time, and travelers need to be able to take a rest, and they need to wash their feet, and they need to, get cleaned up and have a meal before they go on with their journey. So he takes advantage of the fact that he's on the crossroads to provide hospitality to these traveling visitors. So he designed a tent that would be open on all 4 sides specifically so that, as the book actually says, it says in Genesis, he could run to greet them. That's what it says. He ran to greet them. He didn't just sit and wait for them to come to him. He ran out to greet them, welcome them into his tent, wash their feet, and provide a big meal for them. And so Abraham becomes sort of the archetype for providing hospitality in the Jewish tradition. And we should try to strive to be like Abraham and look for opportunities to be hospitable. Returning lost objects. You should check out the Telushkin handout for that. But basically, if you see something in the street, you're not allowed to keep it if you know or can figure out who it belongs to. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud about that as well. So let's say you find a dollar bill in the street. Do you have a responsibility to return it to its owner? The answer is no, because it's a loose dollar bill on the street. There's no way to particularly know who it belonged to. And if an owner were to come up to you and say, hey, did you find a dollar bill? They'd have to be able to describe, something about that bill that would make you believe it was theirs, right? And so if you just find a loose dollar bill somewhere, you can keep it. But they say, of course, they didn't have dollar bills back then. Paper was meaningless to them. Right? You had to have actual silver or gold. That counted, right? So coins, they didn't have paper money. So let's say you didn't find a single coin laying in the road, who knows who it belongs to, but you found a stack of 10 coins off to the side of the road somewhere, stacked up one on top of the other. Well, it doesn't happen by accident that coins get stacked up. It's not like it fell out of somebody's pocket. Somebody placed them there carefully in a stack. Now you're not supposed to take it. Or if you do pick it up, then you have to try and find out who it belongs to, because clearly they left it to come back and pick up sometime. So in the old days, when villages were small, you could go to the center of town, or the gates of the city, usually the gates of where people would meet, and you would announce on 3 successive days, I found a stack of coins such and such a place. If somebody can tell me how many coins it was, give me some indication that it's really yours and you're not just saying it to take the money from me. Give me something believable that would indicate it's your coins. I'll give them to you, right? So you had to announce it and try and return it at least. Obviously, if you find a wallet with somebody's ID in it, then you have the responsibility to try and figure out who that person is, try and find out a phone number or email and call them or write them and say, hey, I found your wallet, and return it. Right, so you have these responsibility to return lost objects and not to keep stuff. And there's one other commandment that goes along with that, which I think is in the text with Telushkin, which is you're not allowed to turn away and pretend you didn't see it. And that commandment has been expanded to all kinds of other places also. That works out to what we're saying now, with respect to all kinds of things like racism, but also potential terrorism. In Israel, when suicide bombing or bombings were more common, if you saw something in the street, a suitcase in the street that was left behind, you would call the police, because you don't know if it's a dangerous suitcase or just somebody forgot a suitcase. Right? If you see somebody doing something racist, you can't just be a bystander. You can't turn aside and pretend you didn't see it. Right? This is a commandment that applies to all kinds of situations. Don't pretend you don't see that. I did a program with a minister on the Good Samaritan, the parable of the Good Samaritan in the New Testament. So for those of you who don't know the story, there's a man who is attacked by robbers on the road and is left in a ditch on the side of the road, beaten up, and all his property has been stolen from him. And according to the parable in the New Testament, a priest walks by and ignores him, a Levite walks by and ignores him, and then a Samaritan comes by and sees him and picks him up and takes him to an inn, pays for him to stay overnight at the inn, gives the innkeeper extra money to pay for medical expenses to help him to heal, and then says to the innkeeper, and if you need more, I'm going to leave for a while, but I'm going to come back in a few days, and if you need more money to take care of this man, I'll pay you for it. I mean, he really goes out of his way to take care of this this person. That's this parable of the Good Samaritan. Now you have to remember that this is told by Jesus, who's Jewish, and he's talking to a Jewish audience. And so although it's in the New Testament, this is a story that would make perfect sense in the Jewish world. And the moral of the story is, it doesn't matter your position, whether you're a priest or a Levite, and it's possible that he wasn't really, for reasons we don't need to go into now, it may not even be relevant that it was a priest and a Levite. It was just two other people walk by, and then the Samaritan goes out of his way to help this person. And the moral is, that's how you should behave, right? And I added the idea that I think this is an example of not turning aside. Just like you're not supposed to turn aside when you see a lost object, if you see somebody injured on the side of the road, you have a responsibility to do something. Call 911 at the minimum, or try and get this person to the hospital if you can. You can't pretend you didn't see it. And so I argue that this is comes under the category of you shall not turn aside, which is said specifically with respect to lost objects, but could be more generally applied. I didn't get too much traction from the other people who I was talking with at the time, but I still think that that is a valid point to make here. Okay, then preventing unnecessary cruelty to animals. So there's a bunch of commandments that talk about that. One of them is not to tear a limb off a living animal. We understand that to be a commandment given to Noah, right? That sounds disgusting and cruel. Why would you do such a thing? But apparently, I guess in some places it was done. So you can't torture animals that way. You're not supposed to harness an ox and a donkey to the same yoke, right? So oxen and donkeys were both used to pull weights, like wagons or whatever. But if you're going to yoke, that is to say, put the harness on an ox, you can't then also put the harness on a donkey at the same time. You have to use two oxen or two donkeys. Why? Because the ox is much bigger and stronger, and he will yank the donkey around all over the place, and it'll be a painful and a horrible experience for the donkey, because the ox is so much bigger. He's yoked to it. It'll hurt him. So you have to yoke similar animals together if you're going to use them in that way. You also they used to use them to a wooden contraption with a grindstone, right? So that the oxen would be pulling this turning device that would be grinding up the grain, for instance, right? And the grain would be ground up and would pour out into a trough, basically where the oxen were walking. So the grain is coming out in front of the oxen. And they said, you can't muzzle the ox when you're asking him to do this, because then you're putting food before him. He's salivating and he can't eat it. That's not fair. That's like torture to the animal. And I guess they weren't worried about cleanliness back then. So you had to allow the ox to eat while he's grinding. It's torture to put food in front of an animal and not let them eat it. And then, of course, is a very famous story, which I think we talked about earlier when we talked about bad things happening to good people, is the commandment to shoo the mother bird away from the nest before you take her eggs or her young, right? So you have a requirement not to steal the young from a mother bird while she's looking at it, right? It's too painful for her to watch her young be taken away. You can do it while she's not looking. It'll still be painful, but it's not the same as watching it happen. So shoo the mother bird away before you take the egg. So these various commandments, and I think there's a couple more, all relate to not having unnecessary cruelty to animals, and the rabbis worked out a general principle of not being cruel to animals. Then the question is, for instance, what about animal experiments? So if, usually you test out new medications or other kinds of things on animals before you test them on humans. And that's a complicated subject, which now that I raised it, I'll dodge. But I will say that there is a general principle, right, that human life is like a very important thing. And if you can save human lives, you're allowed to violate all kinds of other commandments in order to save a life. You can't hurt another human being to save a life, but but it's possible under some circumstances you could run experiments on animals if the end result is to save lives. I think in the medical community, they now have their own ethical rules about when they're allowed to run animal experiments and what the kinds are. So I won't go into a lot of detail on that, just wanted to point that out as an issue. And the last thing I'll talk about is organ donation, and I'll add stem cell research. There's a long article here that I actually wrote for our movement about organ donations. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, so it starts here on the 19th page of the handout. This is something a lot of Jews don't know about. So when you have, when somebody dies, normally the Jewish tradition says you should bury them right away. And in Israel, they bury them almost always within 24 hours. I mean, they really have the funerals immediately. Here in America, it ends up waiting a day or two because there's people out of town who have to fly in. And so you're allowed to delay the wedding to give time for people to come in, at least a certain amount of time. So one thing is you're not supposed to delay the burial. Another thing is you're not supposed to mutilate a body, right? It's still considered a vessel that housed your spirit, your soul. It has some sanctity about it, and you can't just mutilate it. And so because of those two principles, many Jews think you're not supposed to do organ donations. And then there's another problem that some Jews think, the ones who believe in resurrection of the dead, right? Which is a classic Jewish belief, that in the future, when the Messiah comes, all the bodies of the righteous people from prior generations will be restored and your soul will be put back in your body and you're going to live in this world again. So there's this great resurrection that's going to happen. And some Jews think, well, how can I donate a heart to somebody else? And then when the Messiah comes, we're all going to get resurrected and I won't have a heart. That's not going to work, right? So let me answer all these problems. Number one, about the heart. So that was answered already 1,000 years ago. So you will say, how could they have answered that question 1,000 years ago? Heart transplants only started in the 1960s. And by the way, in Houston, Texas. So that's true. Heart transplants didn't happen until recently, but there was war and there was accidents. And in a war or by accident, your arm could be injured and you'd have to have it cut off. And now you wouldn't have an arm. And so 1,000 years ago, Jews were worried, how am I going to get resurrected? My body is going to be without an arm. And that's not going to be paradise for me. I want my other arm. What's going to happen? So a scholar named Saadia Gaon, around 1,000 years ago, answered this question, and it's a brilliant answer. He said, look, God made Adam, according to the Bible, the first human being, God made out of dirt, nothing but dirt. He shaped the dirt in the shape of a human being, and he breathed life into it, and it became a human being. And if God can make a whole human being out of nothing but dirt, he can recreate your body with whatever there is. So don't worry about the hearts. Don't worry about the limbs. That's not a good reason for not doing organ donations. So that's the first thing. Second thing, about delaying the body or mutilating the body. So about mutilating it, my understanding is that the procedure is done medically, right, with respect to the body, right? They do a surgery the way they do surgery on other bodies, and then they sew the body up again. So there's no unnecessary mutilation, and all of these questions, as I said before, are less important than saving a life. So if you're in a situation where you can donate your heart to save somebody else's life, and your life is already gone, then you should absolutely save a life. That's the most important thing. So our movement and the Reform movement basically say it's a commandment to be an organ donor if you can be. The Orthodox world is somewhat divided. There are some Orthodox rabbis who don't allow organ donation, but I believe the overwhelming majority of Orthodox rabbis, including the chief rabbinate in Israel, permits organ donations. What is the reason why some Orthodox rabbis don't allow it? Anybody here a doctor in the medical field? Oh, good. So I can just make this up. Okay, it's not really. Okay, so in order to be an organ donor for most cases, you have to be brain dead. The reason is that for the heart or other major organs, in order for them to be usable as a donation, the blood has to remain circulating, oxygen has to keep going to that organ. And the only way that, and normally that means you're alive. And you can't take an organ from a living person to give it to somebody else who's living. That means you're committing murder, you're killing that person. So the only way that the blood will still be circulating is because you're already in the hospital and you're brain dead. And the blood is being circulated artificially by machinery so that the organs are still in perfect condition while you're dead because your brain there's no brain activity. Usually that means, by the way, you died in some kind of trauma, like a car accident or some kind of other injury to the head. So there's a group of Orthodox rabbis who say brain death is not really death. That's the Talmud Talmud doesn't know from brain death. We only know that there's no brain activity because we have electroencephalographs today. Otherwise, you'd never know. So the Talmudic definition of death was you stop breathing and your your heart stop pumping. And of course, once that happens, the organs are no good. So only if you're brain dead can you do it. And these Orthodox rabbis say brain death is not really death because it's not the Talmudic definition of death. All the other rabbis, including I think a majority of Orthodox rabbis, agree with modern medical science that brain death is death, and therefore you're not killing a person to take the organs. So that's okay. One last word, and then I have to turn this over to Diane, who's patiently waiting on my list here. And that is about stem cell research. So stem cell research was typically done with fetal tissue, which means an aborted fetus or a miscarriage or whatever. They would take the tissue to do stem cell research. The stem cells are from there. And so the Christian world believes that abortions are murder, and therefore they were opposed to stem cell research if it was based on cells taken from an aborted fetus. The Jewish tradition is, again, that in many cases abortion is permitted, and therefore stem cell research would be okay. And all the Jewish movements, including Orthodox, as far as I know, agreed that stem cell research should be permitted. Okay, that's it for today. Kind of a hodgepodge of ethical rules. Hope you all enjoyed it, and look forward to next week. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
I am so sorry. I thought you could hear me. I'm sorry. Let's start over. Okay, we're on page 95.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to sing the Aleph Bet song with you. Here we go. Aleph Bet Bet.
Aleph Bet Bet.
Gimel Dalet Hey.
Gimel Dalet Hey.
Vav Zayin Chet Tet.
Vav Zayin Chet Tet.
Yod Kav Chav.
Yud Kav Chav.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Samech Ayin Pei Fei.
Lamed Fei Fei.
Sadi Kuf Resh.
Sadi Kuf Resh.
Shin Sin Tav. Okay, now looking at our alphabet chart, can you name any letters that you might confuse with an aleph? What other letters on our chart might you confuse with an aleph?
Azadi.
I heard two good answers, ayin and sadi. People definitely confuse those two with aleph. Absolutely. What about bet? What letters might people confuse with bet?
Kaf.
Kaf. And I don't think we've had pay yet, but also pay, kaf and pay. What about vet? What might people confuse with vet?
Chaf.
Right, chaf. Okay, what about dalit? What might people confuse with dalit? Have we done dalit yet? I don't remember.
Yes.
Resh.
Yes. Resh, yes, people frequently confuse dalit and resh. They also sometimes confuse dalit with vav and sometimes even with yud. What about hey? What do people confuse with hey?
Chet. Chet.
Chet is correct. Frequently people confuse hey and chet, and also somebody might have said this, it's a little hard to hear. Sometimes people also confuse hey and tav. You know, if the print's not clear or it's too small, that can happen. All right. Let's see. What might people, well, I think we've done a lot of that. What we've done, have we done mem and mem sofit yet? I don't remember. No, okay. That's all right. Let's turn the page and look at our vowels. So I'm going to maybe read 3 lines at a time, and then you can read it after me. The vowels on page 96. Kamatz, patach, shva, Can you say that now? Do you know where I am on 96?
Kamat.
I'm going to say the name of the vowel and then the vowel sound, and I'll do maybe 3 at a time. Let's do it again.
Okay.
And don't worry about making a mistake. You know, I don't care if people make mistakes. Kamatz, patach, shva, shva, Can you do those 3 for me?
Kamat.
Patach.
Shva.
Good. Okay. Chataf, patach, chirik, cholam,
Chetach.
Patach.
Kirik.
Halam.
Good. Okay, we're going to keep going. The next vowel under the cholam is cholam chaser. Now, cholam chaser is like a cholam, except it loses the vav and it only has the dot on top of the vav. See how cholam is like a vav with a dot on top? And it's pronounced O. Well, cholam chaser is also pronounced O, but it loses the vav. Cholam chaser O. Chataf kamatz O. Segol I'm going to read those 3 again. Cholam chaser O. Chataf kamatz, o, segol, Can you do those?
Kolam.
Kalam,
Haser.
Haser, O,
O,
Hataf,
Hataf. Kamat.
Kamatz,
O.
O,
Segol,
Segol,
Gol,
E.
E.
Good. Now, it would be very easy to get chataf kamatz mixed up with an ah sound, right? Because a regular kamatz is ah. So there are grammar reasons, which I think I knew 35 years ago when I was taking Hebrew grammar at Hebrew University. I had to take Hebrew grammar there, but I do not remember all the rules anymore. So I can't remember exactly what the story is with chataf kamatz, except that I know how to recognize it and how to pronounce it. So when you see a kamatz with 2 dots in front of it, a schwa in front of it, it's O. If you see a kamatz all by itself, it's ah. Okay? All right. Now we're going to go down to chataf segol. And I think you've probably noticed by now that we have a few chataf vowels, and chataf seems to refer to the shava in front of the vowel. So here we have chataf segol, sere, shuruk, kubutz, Let me do maybe 2 at a time. Let's go back to chataf segol. Chataf segol, sere,
Hataf
Taf,
Segol,
Segol, E,
Sere,
Sere, Sere,
E.
E.
Srei.
Sere, Okay, so our 3 chataf vowels are 4 from the top, chataf patach, right? So it's a patach with a shava in front of it, but it's just pronounced like a patach, right? Ah. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bottom, we have chataf kamatz, where we have a kamatz with a shava in front of it. And this we pronounce O. And then we have chataf segol, which has 5 dots. It's a segol vowel with 2 dots in front of it, a shva in front of it, and it's pronounced eh. Okay. Enough of torturing you with that. Let's jump back to the beginning of chapter 11, just for a minute, because we already did this last week. So we're on page 43. And our vocabulary word is chala. And the letter that we're learning is chet. And and chet, we said, looks sort of like an A, but it's closed. I mean, it looks like a hey, but it's closed. So let's read the consonants list at the top of page 43. I'll read all of them once, and then you'll join me by doing 3 at a time. Bet, tav, shin, mem, lamed, kaf, hey, resh, kaf, vet, dalid, aleph, vav, kuf, sadi, ayin, nun, sofit. Okay, now I'll do the first 3 and you do the next 3. Bet, tav,
Shin,
Lamed.
Lamed,
kaf, hey, resh,
Kaf.
Kaf,
Bet.
Vet,
Dalet.
Dalet.
good. Aleph, vav, kuf,
Sadi, Ayin,
nun,
Nun.
sofit.
And Nun Sofit.
Nun,
Okay, Mitsuyan. Okay, let's go to the top of page 44. Okay. I am going to do my best not to make any mistakes. My brain's a little foggy this morning. I was so lucky and I got the COVID shot on Friday. So I'm incredibly lucky. But, you know, it does hurt a little and I didn't sleep super well. So my brain's a little foggy. So feel free to correct me if I make a mistake. I will not be at all offended. Okay. Okay. Line 1. I'll read it twice and then you can read it with me. Chika, chavi, kata, bach, ach, sach. Okay, I'll read it one more time. Chika, chavi, kata, bach, ach, sach. Okay, now I'll read. How about if I read 2 and then you read the next 2, okay? Chika, havi,
Kata,
ach, sach. Good, line 2. I'll read it twice. Chal, chil, chad, chash, chish, chimi. Again, chal, chil, chad, chash, chish, chimi. Okay, why don't you sing this? Why don't you read this line with me? Line 2, you can just read with me.
And what?
Chal, chil, chad,
God,
chash,
Ash,
chish,
Ish,
chimi.
me.
Good. Line 3. I'll read it twice and then you'll read it with me. Kach, sach, nach, lach, ach, chava. Again. Kach, sach, nach, lach, ach, chava. So I'm exaggerating that chet just a little bit. So that you can really hear it. Okay, let's read line 3 together. Kach, sach,
Dach,
nach,
Nach,
lach,
Lach,
ach,
Ach,
chava.
Ava,
Good. Line 4. Chika, shachach, chaviv, chaval, chatan, lakach. And again. Chika, shachach, chaviv, chaval, chatan, lakach. Okay, now read it with me. Chika, shachach, chaviv, chaval, chatan, lakach. All right, let's jump to line 6. Mincha, chamisha, shalcha, chirik, bacharta. Again, mincha, chamisha, shalcha, chirik, bacharta. Okay, now with me. Mincha,
Khan,
chamisha, shalcha, chirik,
Rick,
bacharta.
Baharta,
Good. Okay, that's very nice. And now, line 7. Rachaman, ha-rachaman, shacharit, chatima, chadasha. Okay, again.
خدشة.
That's right. Rachaman.
رحمان.
Rachaman. Shacharit.
شحريت.
Fatima.
فاطمة.
Hadasha. Okay,
خدشة.
read with me. Rachaman.
رحمان.
Rachaman.
Rahman.
Shacharit.
شحريت.
Fatima.
Fatima.
Hadasha.
خدشة.
And line 8. Chala. Haberacha. Chala. Leshabat. Harachaman. Let's do it again. Chala.
هلا.
Haberacha.
هبرخا.
Chala.
الله.
Leshabat.
لشبات.
Harachaman. Okay,
كرخمان.
Chala.
Lan.
Haberacha.
Ablaha.
Chala. Leshabat.
Leshebat.
Harachaman.
Karahaman.
Right. Okay, can anybody find the word ha-rachaman? That means the merciful one. Ha means the, and rachaman is merciful. Can you find ha-rachaman? I see
Yep.
it. Yeah, we have both rachaman and we have ha-rachaman, don't we? Right.
Right.
So sometimes in prayers, when they have ha in front of a word, it doesn't just mean the, although ha does mean the most of the time. But in prayers, sometimes ha in front of a word means the one who. So let's see. Ha bocher. If you see the word ha bocher bat Torah, ha bocher, ha means the one who chooses, right? Or in the opening prayer in the service when we do Baruch Hu, it sounds like this. On Friday night we do Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed. So the word Mevorach means blessed. Blessed, B-L-E-S-S-E-D, blessed. But ha-mevorach means the one who is blessed. So when we sing that at the beginning of services, we're saying, Baruch Hu et Adonai, everyone bless Adonai, ha-mevorach, the one who is blessed. So see that ha could take on a lot more than just being the. Okay. Can you find the word for blessing? I kind of gave it away. Can you find it?
Habracha.
Habracha. Very good. The blessing. Habracha. Okay. All right. I'm going to ask you to just do lines 1, 2, and 3 with me on page 45, okay? Let's just try to sing them. I told you my brain's not 100%. Let's try to read them together. Lines 1, 2, and 3. Here we go. Ha.
Ha.
He.
He.
Did I not say where we are? I'm sorry. Top of 45, Hebrew Marathon. Let's try to read it together. First, let's notice what look-alike consonants we have. We have chet, chet, hey, hey, tav, 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 right? Okay. And then we have ah, e, ah, e, ah. Now let's try reading it. Ha, He,
He,
he, ha,
Ha,
ha, chi,
Ti,
ti, ta. Good. Line 2. I'll read it.
In line number 1, there's the third from the left, tav, the one with the yud. Is that pronounced just T or is it Te?
It would need 2 dots to be te.
Okay.
Yeah, the yud makes it a longer vowel, but I don't really emphasize short and long vowels very much. I don't think you'll really need to worry about short and long vowels.
Okay. Thank you.
The yud is just part of the E vowel, but sometimes you'll get an A vowel where you get 2 horizontal dots with a yud. That's one way of writing the A vowel. So we will see that.
Okay.
Okay, so line 2, let's see. I'm going to just read it once and then we'll go back and read it together. Ha, e, la, ma, ka, chi, ba, bat. Can you try reading that with me? Ha, e, lot,
Lot,
ma,
Ma,
ka,
Ha,
chi, ba,
Ba.
Bat,
okay. Oh dear. So on line 3, we have a lot of look-alike letters. So let's just look at the first consonant in each of the syllables on line 3. Just the first consonant. So it's tav, chet, resh, resh, chet, chet, hey. Okay, I'm going to read the line and then you'll read it with me after that. Ta, chat, ra, rata, ha, chil, ha, cha. Can you read it with me this time? Ha,
Ta,
cha,
Ha,
ra,
Ra,
rata,
Ta,
ha,
Ha,
chil,
Kil,
ha.
Ha.
Good. Okay, line 4. Ooh, okay. I'll just read it twice and then you'll try to read it with me. Chala, achat, la kachat, lehadlik, katan. Again, chala, achat, la kachat, lehadlik, katan. Okay, now read it with me.
Chala,
Chala, tachat, la kachat, lehadlik, katan.
Is it Khatan, the last one?
Katan. And that means groom.
Khatan.
Like a bride and a groom, a kala is a bride and a khatan is a groom. Okay, line 5. I'll read it twice and then you'll read it with me. Ahavat lehat chil shacharit chava berit. Again, ahava lehatchil shacharit chava berit.
Berit.
One more time. Ahavat
Ahabat.
lehatchil shacharit
Shacharit.
chava
Haba. Berit.
So does anybody know what any of the words on line 5 mean? I'm just curious. Does anyone wanna-
Shacharit is a service in the morning.
Yes, Tov Ma'od. That's right. Shacharit is the morning prayer service. Very good.
Chava is a name. Is that a name of Eve? Chava.
Chava. Yes, that's Eve. Eve. Right. Chava is Eve. Ahavat comes from the word ahava, which means love. Ahav
Mm,
means love. And Brit is a covenant. Brit is a covenant. Okay. Oh, and lehatchil, to begin. Okay. We did sounds like last time. I am not really sure what the point. I guess if we had a board, but I'm not very good at doing the whiteboard on the computer. I apologize. If we had a board, we could play baseball at the bottom of the page. But let's just try to read these, okay? So I'm just going to do line 1, first base, second base, third base, and we're just going to read it like another exercise, okay? I'll read it twice, and then we'll read it together. Be'ahava arvit madricha. Be'ahava arvit madricha. With me now? Be'ahava
Behaba,
arvit.
Arbit,
Arvit, right? Not Arbit.
Right.
Arvit.
Yes, I'm going to go back.
Arvit.
Thank you for asking about that. Madricha.
Madricha.
Ha.
Does anybody remember the little memory device that we use to remember the difference between bet and vet? How do we know if it's bet or vet?
Oh, I remember this one.
Oh, the button.
That has a button.
A
Bet
belly button.
button. Right. So on line 1, first base, Be'ahava, you can see that we have a bet and a vet, right?
Mm.
What about the second word? Line 1, second base. Is that a bet or a vet?
A vet.
Nachon. Okay. And,
Arbit.
right. Arvit, which is
Madricha.
evening, and is also the name of the evening prayer service. So Shacharit is the morning service and Arvit is the evening service. Okay, line 2. Line 2. Lehachbi chaviv shachach. Lehachbi chaviv shachach. Can you read that with me? It's hard.
Lehabib,
Chaviv
Habib,
shachach.
Shachach.
Good, let's do it again. Lehavi chaviv
Habib,
shachach.
Shachach.
Yes, that's not easy. Okay, line 3. Hama shechina mishkan. Hama shechina mishkan. Okay, with me. Hama
Hama,
shechina
Shekinah,
mishkan.
Mishkan.
So does anybody know what Shekhinah is? Have any of you heard that word before?
Yes, it's
That's God.
God
The presence of God.
is with us. He's over.
Right, that's right. That's kind of according to the mystics, Shekhinah is the sort of Spirit of God that's immanent as opposed to transcendent, right? The Spirit of God that's close to us is the Shekhinah. So, okay. And does anybody know what the Mishkan was?
The Mishkan was like the temple.
Right. Yes. And it was also sometimes the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, when the Israelites were wandering in the desert. Sometimes they called that the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and sometimes they called it the Mishkan. Very good. Okay, line 4. Kabbalat Kavanah Baal. Kabbalat Kavanah Baal. Can you read it with me this time? Kabbalat
Kabbalah.
Kavanah
Kavanah.
Baal. Okay. So the word Kabbalat. Who's heard the expression Kabbalat Shabbat? Kabbalat Shabbat. Has anyone heard that expression?
Mm.
Do you know what it means? I don't want you to put yourself on the line.
Kabbalah. I don't remember.
Like a singing Shabbat? Like where
It's the first part of the Shabbat Friday night service. Kabbalat Shabbat means welcoming Shabbat.
Welcoming Shabbat.
So you were close. And sometimes you hear the expression Kabbalat Panim. That means welcoming friends. Kabbalat Panim. So Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming Shabbat. Kabbalat Panim, welcoming friends. Okay. Welcoming faces. Panim. Okay. All right. Does anybody know what Kavanah is? We're supposed to pray with Kavanah. What is Kavanah? We're supposed
Faith?
to pray. I'm sorry,
Purpose? Like when you pray with purpose, with really focusing, like with lots of intention.
what? Yes, very good. Right. It's with, it literally comes from the word direction. And it's when your prayers are really focused, really directed, really intentional, right? You're not just kind of hanging out in shul, but you're really focused on the prayers. Then you're praying with kavanah. It's hard to always pray with kavanah, but we do our best, right? Okay, and the last word, Baal. You know what Baal?
I think that's the idol name, isn't it?
Not in this particular case.
I don't know.
It means master. And it can also mean husband. So some people aren't so thrilled with that. And, and it can also mean somebody who's like in charge of it, of something. So
like a superior.
What?
Like a superior?
It could be that. It could be that. But like in the synagogue, the person who leads prayers are called tefillah. So the person who leads prayers would be Baal tefillah, right? Kind of the prayer leader, right? And the person who reads the Torah, koreh, means read, and Baal koreh is the person who's in charge of reading. Baal koreh, the person who's in charge of reading Torah. Okay, we'll just do a little bit of the next chapter. Actually, let me just quiz you on our vocabulary first. All right, so what does shamash mean?
Helper.
Kala. What is a kala?
Bride.
Right.
What is a bracha?
Blessing.
Havdalah.
Last service of Saturday.
I heard a lot of answers. They were probably all correct. It means a separation or a division, and it's also the service at the end of Shabbat when you separate the holy from the profane, right? You re-enter the week. Okay. Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You might be saying it and I can't hear you. But anyway, ve'ahavta. Dana, did you say what it was? And I just didn't hear you?
love.
Yes, good. And you will love. Very good. Okay. What is tzedakah?
Justice.
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 Justice, right. What is a mitzvah?
A commandment.
Commandment.
Tov ma'od, a commandment. Shema, what's Shema?
Here.
Here,
Here.
Hear, listen.
the
Navi.
prayer,
Navi.
prophet,
Good. And what is challah?
That's the bread. It's so yummy.
What's that yummy bread? It's a yummy
yes,
grated bread that we eat on Shabbat and holidays. Okay, Metsuyan. Okay,
Messiah.
let's turn to page 46 and we'll just get started on
Nahon, Nahon.
that. Bidiyuk. Bidiyuk means exactly.
Metsuyan.
I think we've covered almost everything now. Okay, page 6. Oh, this is so easy because all we have to do is add yud. And yud, which we've already talked about a little bit, it kind of looks like a tiny little resh or a tiny little lamed that's kind of floating. It's kind of floating, right? It's not full length. And it frequently appears in the E vowel, but it works very much like a Y in English. So let's jump down to 46 at the bottom of the page. And I'm just going to show you how yud works as a consonant. Ya, ya, yi, ye, ya. Again, ya, ye, ya. Can you read that with me?
Ya,
Yeah. Good. Line 2. Okay, they want to confuse us. They want us to get vav and yud mixed up, but we won't do that, right?
Right.
So I'll read line 2 and then you'll read it with me. Ya, va, ye, ve, ye, vi. Okay, try reading with me. Ya,
Ja,
va, ye, ve, vi.
V.
Good. Okay, line 3. Okay, here, I guess they're thinking that maybe you will confuse a yud with a resh, or maybe you'll confuse it with a nun sofit. Let's see how this goes. I'll read the line twice and then you'll read it with me. Yasha, yar, yin, yeshi, kayi, yedi. Again. Yasha, yar, yin, yeshi, chayi, yedi. Do you want to try reading it with me this time?
Yasha,
Yar, yin, yeshi, chayi, yedi. Yedi. So if yud has a vowel under it, you treat it like a consonant. If it doesn't have a vowel under it, you can assume that it's part of the vowel that precedes it. So for example, the last word on line 3, yedi, the yud at the end of yedi doesn't have a vowel under it, right? It's at the end of the word and it doesn't have a vowel under it. So you can just assume it's part of the E vowel. And the word right before that, chayi. There's a vowel under the yud, right? So then it's like a Y. It's like a consonant. Chayi. Chayi. If there's a vowel under the yud, it's a consonant. So, okay, line 4. I'll read it twice and then you'll do it with me. Yaba, yish, yeka, yacha, yahi, yal. Again, yaba, yish, yeka, yacha, yahi, yal. Can you read it with me now? Yaba,
Yaba,
Ba,
yaba,
yish,
ish,
yeka,
yeka,
yacha,
yaha,
yahi,
yahi,
yal.
yal,
yal.
So what's the rule if we
Yal.
have a Schwa vowel at the end of a word? What's our rule for Schwa at the end of a word?
Silent?
silent,
Yes. Schwa is those 2 vertical dots under the word. That's a vowel, and it is silent at the end of a word. Okay, line 5. What's the rule for Schwa at the beginning of a word?
Pronounce.
Pronounce it, and it's a
It-
single syllable.
Yes, thank you. That's right. Okay,
Thank you.
line 5. I'll read it twice, and then you'll read it with me. Yeshana, Yashva, Yashi, Yekara, Niya. Again. Yeshana, Yashva, Yashi, Yekara, Niya. Okay, now read it with me. Yeshana,
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 Yashva,
Shva,
Shva,
Yashi,
Yashi,
Yekara,
Yekara,
Niya.
Niya.
Okay, so for homework on page 7, if you could try to do the last 3 lines, okay? And then I'd like you to look for these vocabulary words. Aliyah, which means going up, like when you go up to the Torah to say a blessing, that's an aliyah. And minyan, which we say in Ashkenazic minyan, right? That's 10 adults praying together. Okay, so you can look for those 2 words. So if you would try to do,
Diane, I'm sorry, what was the second word?
it's aliyah and minyan, which we say in Ashkenaz, we say minyan. We say minyan, but it's really minyan.
So we have to find it through sounding it out, right? 'Cause
Well,
we don't know.
some of you are very visual and you can find words that look like those, right?
Okay.
Different kinds of learners in the group.
Okay.
Some of us sound out words and some of us just kind of memorize what they look like. Okay, good. So you'll do 6, 7, and 8 for next week.
Okay.
Toda rabba. Everybody stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
thank you.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good work.
Bye.